Okay, cool. We are live. Hello, my gentle and modern apes. Welcome everyone to this very unique episode of Busting Genesis Apologetics. If you'll remember, last time we were doing this, we stumbled across an area that I don't know anything about, which is A&E studies and hermeneutics. So I called in the big boys. I messaged Digital Hammurabi to see if you'd be willing to put up with some nonsense this evening. So this is Dr. Josh. You guys have probably seen him around. I know I have. That's how I knew he was the one to call. So Dr. Josh, would you like to let everyone know who, by some chance, they have not heard of you, kind of your background, what you're interested in, what you studied, and how psyched you are to be talking Genesis apologetics tonight?
Yeah, absolutely. And Erica, thank you for having me on. I'm really excited about this. I've been looking forward to it all day. So I'm Joshua Bowen. I got my master's. Well, I got my bachelor's in religion from Liberty University and a master's in theology from Capital Bible Seminary. So two very fundamentalist evangelical schools. So I feel very well equipped to talk about this topic tonight. Then I went and got my master's in ancient Near Eastern studies and a PhD in Assyriology with a minor in Hebrew Bible from Johns Hopkins University. So I became an atheist when I went to Hopkins, but it's I think both sides of the coin I get to that makes this nice. So my what?
That's such a unique perspective that you've got. Really, I know it sounds like I'm being kind of like joking around, cheeky, I guess, but really, like, I think there are very few people who are kind of qualified to tackle this.
Well, I guess if anybody had to suffer through it, I guess I'm glad that I had to suffer through it. But I mean, I know, I know when I wrote my master's thesis, I wrote it on the use of the divine name El Shaddai, the meaning of it. And I had a paragraph in the beginning that said one of the presuppositions of this study is that Moses wrote the entirety of the Pentateuch, which is absolute nonsense, right? Yeah. In modern scholarship, but has been for like 150 years, but nonetheless. So my wife and I run a YouTube channel. She runs it. I participate in it. It's called Digital Hammurabi. And basically we take the ancient Near East and the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and, make it understandable. I find myself doing an awful lot of coming to the defense of atheism and atheists online here. I'll be going on the Atheist Experience next Sunday, which I'm really looking forward to. Just did a debate. Yeah, just did a debate with Matt Dillahunty last weekend on the topic of slavery in the Old Testament.
I caught that. It's Cliff and Stewart, yeah?
Yeah. It was fun. They're really nice guys. But
yeah.
I just, I find that atheists and agnostics and just skeptics in general catch a really bad rap. And they shouldn't, because I think their arguments are actually quite often spot on. So, I'm actually writing a book now. I got 2 chapters left, I think. And it's called The Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament. So it'll cover all these topics. So
yeah, absolutely.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think before we begin, I think that's something that is really, really important to appreciate, is that, there are folks out there who, like yourself, right, have done in-depth work on ancient Near Eastern studies and on the hermeneutics and biblical studies in general, looking back at the original language and understanding it, not just in the context of the language itself, but in the culture that it was written in. And I could count on one hand the number of times that I've seen apologists reference the original culture, the original language, when trying to interpret something. Mm-hmm. And I think that seems like step one, to understanding what a text is trying to say. And it seems like it's not that difficult of a concept, because, these kinds of folks will be all on board with doing so to understand something in Egyptian or, through the hieroglyphics and which, Coptic versus, older versions of those kinds of texts or etchings or whatever. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since I took Egyptology, but I so rarely see that same rigor applied in an apologetics context outside of academia. And I think what you're doing is really important. That I'm certain that everyone here is subscribed to Digital Hammurabi. If you're not, that's what you should be doing right now. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious, do you get that vibe as well, or do you think that they tend to do a pretty good job? Maybe I'm totally off base.
No, I mean, so the problem, like to try to be fair, one of the difficulties I think with Christian apologetics is that there's so many things that they have to argue. There's so many areas that they have to cover. And of course, I think that's incredibly problematic for any number of reasons. And what ends up happening is this is just from me looking around and from having done apologetics before I became an atheist, is that you end up sort of, because you're starting with the conclusion that the Bible is the inspired, inerrant word of God, at least the type of apologetics I was doing, you then say, okay, it's like going into a murder and saying, well, like you've watched the show Monk, and Monk said, Jimmy did it. And everybody goes, Jimmy couldn't have done it. And you say, nope, Jimmy did it. So then you start with okay, we know that Jimmy did it because Monk said that he did.
Right.
Is there a way that it's possible that this happened and this happened and this happened and Jimmy still did it? And I think that's what I see in apologetics is, so somebody says, look, Ezekiel 26 is a failed prophecy against the city of Tyre. And they go, okay, well, we know that there can't be failed prophecy. We know that. So is there a way to explain this that makes it possible? And if they get one of those or two of those, we can move on. We can move on to that because we've got a lot of topics. We got a lot of things we have to defend. So as long as you get a couple of make it possible, a lot of times it's just what I see, that's sort of the mentality. Yeah.
That's so an interesting kind of what's an interdisciplinary comment there. I see the same thing all the time from the biology side of sort of the young Earth creationists that get at this, because there are plenty, innumerable apologists and Christians and religious people in general who are totally cool with conventional science. And given that's what I care about, I tend to be like, check it off, cool, we've got no beef. But so obviously that leads to a lot of feuding with creationists in general, young Earth creationists, and to a lesser degree, the older guys. But I find that it's the exact same thing there. It's saying, okay, well, we've got to cram everything into this 6,000 year time period. So how can we force fit that data rather than doing what conventional science does, which is looking at the data and drawing conclusions from it rather than starting with the conclusions? And golly, I can't even imagine. It's no wonder that there aren't very many of them, the young Earth creationists who are in academia in general. Because if you wrote like that, if you studied like that, if you built a model with that in mind, you get booted instantly. So I'm totally with you on that one, and the frustration that comes with that. And these are folks who tend to be like, we're in it for the truth, and then I'm like, are you?
Yeah. I mean, because they believe that they have it, right? So they're in it too. And this is I'm writing a chapter in the book on like biblical archaeology, and sort of I just finished the section of sort of the history of how it developed. And when you look back in the 19th century and you see how, and even in the early and mid 20th century, you see how these archaeologists that dug in Israel, I mean, it's the Bible in one hand and the spade in the other is sort of the picture that's drawn, and it's true. So they're Wright and William Albright, they're amongst many others going out knowing that that the Bible's historically reliable. So now we just have to verify. We have to prove that, and so they're digging sites and they're drawing conclusions that they're not letting the data speak. They're saying, all right, where can this fit? And it's just incredibly problematic. And so, of course, since the 80s, that's changed, thank God. But it's very difficult.
And sympathize. I could talk all day. We could talk all day about that one subject, how we look at data and how we should. But we have to unfortunately, Dawn, gird our loins and discuss and listen to Genesis Apologetics. So I'm gonna share the screen here, so we're gonna get like the tunnel vision real fast, but we'll hop right into it. And to everyone in the chat, first of all, thank you for being here. We've got like 60-something people, which is cool, as I think the days. And at the end, if Dr. Josh is willing, maybe we can take a few questions, if that sounds okay with you. Because I know folks are really interested in this topic, and God knows I can't answer the questions. So we're starting off here, and one of my favorite things about Genesis Apologetics is how shamelessly they crib diagrams from both conventional documentaries, and this one right here is just ripped directly from Answers in Genesis, which is funny, but in a sad way. We've got this lovely creation orchard. I have to include the chimps just to remind everybody, no, don't worry, you're not in it. So, but this is when they start really getting into the ancient Near Eastern stuff. So I'm gonna let it play, and Dr. Josh, when you want to stop and basically tear this guy a new one, just let me know, and I'll hit the pause button.
Cool.
Maybe I'll pause sometimes to ask questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right, let's start.
Within kinds we see today. Now let's compare the biblical flood to the leading flood myth, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In 1853, archaeologists found a series of 12 tablets dated to around 650 BC. Although parts of the story existed in earlier fragmentary versions, because the story had many of the same elements as the Genesis account, skeptics believe that Gilgamesh preceded the biblical account, negating the Genesis.
So I listened to this morning on the way into work, and the way this is presented is interesting to me. So something to sort of pay attention to. Cuneiform tablets, the thing that he put up on the screen for people that don't know, this is how they wrote. They wrote not exclusively, but they wrote very often on clay tablets, and many of the literary texts, much of the literature exists on clay tablets. So like this is a replica of an amulet. I don't know if that'll focus up enough, but anyway, that's cuneiform. So they take a stylus and they make wedges in the clay. So we have clay tablets extant from the invention of writing, right? Late 4th millennium BCE.
Right.
So we're not working with, we're very, very often not reconstructing some text because we have it, right? So now so that everybody knows, there's a huge cache of tablets that were found from the early mid 1st millennium BCE, and it's called the Library of Ashurbanipal. And lots of tablets, lots of literature. So a lot of the stuff, then they're very written in somewhat of a standard form and very well written and fairly well preserved in many cases. So, but the literary tradition that you see for something like Gilgamesh didn't start in the 1st millennium. And the way that he portrays this, so a lot of the tablets do come from the 1st millennium. They also come from like 1800 BCE, right? So it's a little tricky where he says they come from 700. There were a couple earlier ones, but it's almost like very, very late. When I heard this, I thought, what is he talking about? This isn't a 1st millennium text. So just sort of I guess everybody be aware of that. And that's not guesswork, right? We have the tablets. You can go to Yale, you can go to Penn, and you can see these old Babylonian, these early 2nd millennium tablets. And of course, the Gilgamesh stories go back into the 3rd millennium. Like not way back in the 3rd millennium, but toward the end of it, but certainly just tons and tons of them in the early 2nd millennium in Sumerian. And then, of course, into Akkadian. So, I think that's something to pay close attention to. And what's interesting, and then I'll be quiet, sorry.
No, I think this stuff is awesome. Please continue.
the gentleman that he brings on, I forgot his name. I think he's from Liberty. It actually addresses this, right? And so it was weird that it, like he talks about the Sumerian precursors and the Sumerian stories about Gilgamesh, and then I think he mentions the old Babylonian version. So it's strange to me that it's not strange, I suppose. It's a little disingenuous to cast it this way. Like, it's so late, because the whole point that he's trying to make here is that which one came first.
Right. Yeah. Right. So
yeah, good.
So no, I wanted to ask a question. So because I think this is interesting. So how do folks, the scholars who study A&E civilizations, how do they date these tablets?
Yeah, so that's a fun question. It's obviously probably complicated, like it's complicated with you, but
it always is. It always is.
So there are several ways, and obviously these things will often sort of come together to provide more more accurate tape. So from an archaeological standpoint, just very basic, when a group of people live in a city, particularly in Mesopotamia, where the buildings are made of mud brick, and that mud brick will last about 50 years, before it's got to be redone. And what happens is, the material culture, the buildings, the pots, the sherds, the bones, all these things, they sort of settle as time goes by, and new buildings are rebuilt and new people move in, whatever. But what ends up happening is, as these things fall into disrepair and kind of, get built upon, you get this layer, they call it an occupation layer. And Eric, I know you know all this stuff, but just for everybody, so we're on the same page.
I think it's perfect. It's nice to hear it in the context of what you do as well, like with the occupational layers. I don't know. Continue.
So those layers, they're not just dirt, right? But they also contain all kinds of things. Anything that's in that city. Again, lots and lots of pottery sherds. We find them everywhere. I dug in Syria in 2009, I think. 2010. It was just before the Civil War. At a site about an hour and a half east of Aleppo. And so, you find pottery everywhere. Pottery's everywhere. Pottery sherds. But you find animal bones. Of course, you find human bones in the cemeteries and the burial places. And but you'll also, if you get into residential areas or places where scribes are working, you often find tablets. Right? You'll find writing. And so anyway, all that stuff gets buried in an occupation layer, and then they build on top of it. And then the later city, when that one starts to fall into disrepair, or it gets built up as time goes by, that gets its own occupation layer. And so you get layer upon layer upon layer. This is called stratigraphy, because it's different strata, one stratum, strata. So when an archaeologist comes to a mound or comes to a site and digs down, they dig a square, you can look at the wall that's left and look at it from the side, and they call that a bulk. And that bulk, you can see the layers. It's like a cross section. You can see the layers of occupation. Okay. So with that basic idea in mind, what they do is they look at the materials. One of the things that they do is look at the materials that are in that layer, that they find in that layer. So let's say you're digging and you find a whole bunch of tablets in a scribe's house or something. Well, those tablets have their own dates very often. So they'll have a thing at the end called the colophon, where the scribe puts his name and the date and what kind of tablet it is. And now they don't say, obviously, it's 1827 BCE, right? It doesn't say that. Nobody. But what they do say,
right? Or not clues, but they date it within the context. And if we know the context, we can decipher that date. That's
exactly right. So they'll say in, the year that Shulgi, the king, rebuilt the Magor boat or something, or the day that he rebuilt the Temple of Enlil or whatever. The year that he built rebuilt the Temple of Enlil, the god Enlil. Well, scribes, they had to be able to date things. It is really important because we have lots of legal texts, lots of administrative texts, and they all need to be dated. Maybe not all of them, but many of them need to be dated because it's very important.
Right. Yeah.
So they'll put a date, and it depends on when we're talking about which system's in place, but oftentimes it'll be the year of that Shogi did or that the king did X. And what happens is, and they'll give you the month and they'll give you the day as well. But what happens is scribes will then keep these longer lists of year names. That's what they call those, a year name. And they'll say, they'll just, every time there's a new year name, they put that on the tablet, and they have these, compilation tablets. And so we have them, right? You can physically go look at them.
Right. Yeah. It's like to apply to each subsequent tablet, right?
That's right. And so what ends up happening is, so that gives you a relative set, right? If we can anchor one of these years, then we have all the years around them, right? Is sort of how it works out. So then there are other things that they do to try to get those anchor points. For example, if a text talks about a battle that we know from other sources, the year that it happened, you can make that sort of connection. If you have some type of like a major eclipse, and we can determine, because lots of Omena, they had these omen texts where they would talk about if an eclipse happened, that was a really big deal,
right?
So if they can determine, I think there's one in like 763, there was some major eclipse. I think that's the date. We know the date. You can figure that stuff out outside of my specialization, but then you can anchor that. So you anchor that year, and that gives you this, long tie, this cross tie to all these different events. So that's a really long answer.
No,
it certainly doesn't exhaust it, but that's sort of how they get at it.
So additionally too, because one of my favorite things about when we're dating older civilizations is how different civilizations can corroborate one another. So I think it's really interesting that you bring up something like an eclipse, because that's going to be something that pretty much everyone notices. And then you can kind of cross-check one civilization to another and be like, okay, well, if we've got an anchored date, here in Egypt, and we know when the eclipse occurred, you can use that to kind of cross-check, the Babylonian chronology, right? And kind of work around that, right? And my favorite thing about this too, and this is my bias of like the kind of more radiocarbon dating aspect, it's like, if you've got bones and they're bones, they're not mineralized bone, well, that's a great way to cross corroborate it too.
There was an article that came out 2012, 10, something like that. I can't remember. But there was sometimes, not very often, but sometimes we'll find wood, timber,
right,
or at least remnants of it. And there was one in Upper Mesopotamia, so like northern Iraq, eastern Syria, and they found one. There was a king, Shamshi-Adad, who was a really popular, very powerful king. And in one of his palaces, I think is where it was, they found this timber, this like a beam that was used. And they used radiocarbon dating, and I can't remember what the specifics were of it. But see, when you do that, then you can say, okay, this piece of timber was found in this occupation layer. And so that occupation layer, or if you can date a tablet or a group of tablets in that occupation layer, that gives you much greater precision about all the things that are in that. And it's more complex than that, because you can have foundations that dig down, and you can have anyway. But the point is that it's these correlations that are made. It's very complex. And
right. Well, appreciating the complexity of it, that's part of the problem when you've got, folks who are trying to speak about this from outside of that area of expertise, right? Because they come at it and they say something like, well, there's a lot of assumptions that are made when they say something like, that this tablet was found in this time period, right? And it's like, well, I don't know about that, right? Like, it really undersells the work that folks are out there doing to actually corroborate this amongst civilizations, and indeed within the stratigraphy of a given site. I don't know, it's really interesting to hear. When you said stratigraphy, I started getting like war flashbacks, because when I took Egyptology, we had to do a stratigraphy of like a fake dig site that was like a bin filled with different colored sand. And like, to my professor's credit, she was like really into it. She worked at Amarna, at the Amarna site.
Yeah. Wow.
And pardon me?
What's her name?
Oh, I don't remember now. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I could probably pull it up. I'll pull it up while we're watching, because I know she's still on staff at my University of Arkansas. And it was actually really funny, because she was telling us, she's a Catholic woman, and she was like, yeah, we were all sitting around, and someone asked the question, what about the Exodus? Like, you're Catholic, what do you think? Because it was a small class, and she kind of sat there and she was like, well, she was like, that's a really complicated question. She's like, but the long and short of it is, we don't have any support for that right now. And she was like, but again, she's like, that's not my time period that I'm looking, it's like the classic, that's not my area, but but she was really cool about that. The stuff that she did at Amarna, I want to say that she was, I know she was there when one of the groups there was analyzing the dentition of some of the remains that they found there, and they were wondering why are all of these folks who were being found at Amarna, why do they have so many cavities? And they found out it was because there were date palms growing all over the place, and so they were eating these sugary date palms as like a huge part of their diet, and ending up with all these cavities. And I remember kind of thinking, and I was like, that's something I'd never, the dental care is something that I'd never really appreciated. But when we play this, I'll try to find her, because it was
don't stress yourself.
hey, listen, I'm not trying to, but I feel obligated now, so that everyone knows I'm not making it up, that I did take Egyptology at some point.
I'm sure that's what everyone's thinking.
listen, my audience, they rule with an iron fist. All right, sorry, I was looking down at my phone a couple times, because since I've got the screen shared, I wanted to pull it up so I can keep an eye on chat and see what's going on there. So I had to pull it up on my phone. But we'll keep playing. Just holler when you want me to pause it again.
Just a spin-off. Fortunately for Christians, however, there are major clues that point to the biblical account as the accurate one, and Gilgamesh as a later work of fiction that incorporated legendary elements of a flood within a cultural fantasy.
I love this. I love this image right
here. The truth meter.
The truth meter. Because the funny part is, the Epic of Gilgamesh is at 40% true. Why is it at 40%?
And what does that even mean, truth? Anyway, yeah. Sorry.
Listen, I love it. And Dan Biddle, really, he has the top brass working on the graphics for the Genesis.
Hey, I mean, even if it's at 40, it's still in the frowny face range. So it's no good.
It is, but not by much.
Not by much.
Those rascally pagans really they got more than we're right than we thought. So
here are the reasons why. First, we have the feasibility of the Gilgamesh version of the Ark, described as a massive, unstable cube that was about 200 feet on each side, with 6 decks that divided it into 7 parts.
On this channel, we stand the cube Ark. By the way, that's the you may not like. This is what peak boat performance looks like. You may not like it, but this is what it is.
Along with help from the community and craftsmen, he supposedly built this vessel, which was over 3 times the size of the biblical Ark, in just a week. How would something like this fare during a catastrophic worldwide flood?
Like, it's funny. There's certain things that are funny to me about this video, and I shouldn't laugh, but I'm going to. And that is, like, when you watch the Transformers movie, for example, and you say things like, well, how did he get over there so quickly? And you think, if that's your problem with the reality, of this movie, the feasibility of this movie, how he moved really quickly to one side, like there are alien transformers, right? Like, this is your problem with this?
I thought you were going with a comparison to this cube arc to the Allspark. As someone who enjoyed the Transformers movies, I thought that's where that was going, and I got
that would have been brilliant. I'm not that smart.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, to bear this in mind, there's a seemingly long discussion about, the feasibility of the arc. Now, like, I'm not a boat guy, right? So I don't know about shipbuilding, and I don't know. I suspect. So first of all, there are different ways that different versions of the flood myth in Mesopotamian texts, both Sumerian and Akkadian, primarily in Akkadian, depict this boat, right?
Right.
So if anybody's interested, I think in 2014, Irving Finkel, who's an amazing guy at the British Museum, and a Assyriologist, he's like 10 times at least more brilliant than I am. So he should be the one talking about this. But he's incredibly busy. But like he's got a flood tab. Look up the Simmons tablet, and it shows the ark as a coracle, right? It's like a circle, but it's like a bowl almost. Anyway,
I've seen reproductions of that. There was a Netflix documentary a while back that was like Finding Noah's Ark, and their whole deal, like, yes, it's. I almost would describe it as like this inner tube looking thing, except the walls are steeper, right? Like the bowl explanation is good, but it has a top on it, right? Like it's the bowl with the top.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, the thing is, while I think all these things are very interesting to think about, the size and the way that, it's described and the differences that are in the text. And this is just the way it is, I think, in general, if you're coming at this trying to figure out what's the feasibility of this ark to hold 2 of every animal, like, you're going about this the wrong way. Like, you're not reading this text the way that it was intended to be read. That they're not writing this. Now let's make sure that we're describing a boat that will actually float in a worldwide flood. Right? That's not what the text is doing.
So quick question about that, because this is something that I hear a lot from creationists or people who interpret, not even creationists, just folks that think that the worldwide flood was a thing, right? Real quick, TP Seeker says in the side chat, it's funny how young Earth creationists won't mention Göbekli Tepe. That's a swear word in young Earth creationism. You don't want to bring up Göbekli Tepe.
It's too old.
It's too old. It's too old. I like to imagine that, in the beginning, like, there's nothing. You've got the primordial waters and like this chaotic soup, and then Göbekli Tepe is just kind of chilling. It's just like floating there in the ether, and God's like, shoot, get out of the way.
I mean, Erica, I got to tell you, like, I feel like there's such a simple answer to all this old Earth evolution stuff. I mean, really, because this is how I never felt the need to get into it when I was a fundamentalist.
Right.
And that is, in the Garden of Eden, if you cut down a tree, would there have been tree rings?
I suppose there would have to be.
There would have had to have been, right? Because look, when Adam was 10 seconds old, how old did he look? He didn't look 10 seconds old.
True.
He probably looked 30, right? So he was created with apparent age.
Right.
Well, if you dig down and you see these layers that make it look like it's 1,000,000 years or something, look, that's just apparent age, Erica.
Oh, listen. The problem with that, though, is those pesky prehistoric animals, because you get the Ken Ham. This is what happened. The whole apparent age with the dinosaur fossils that just make things look old, that works. But then Ken Ham realized dinosaurs sell big money. You got to figure out a way to include these big reptiles in the worldview, right? And so it's like, but kids love dinosaurs. That's dinosaurs are the sleeper agent of young Earth creationism, in my opinion. Sorry, Dr. Dino, who's going to be offended in the chat. Yes. What I was going to ask you, within the cultural context, in your opinion, or I suppose in the consensus opinion, what what was the Noachian flood story? How was that kind of interpreted by, like, if you were just an average Joe living around, I don't know, 3000 BC, right? And you hear this flood story. Are you thinking that are you looking at it in sort of this phenomenal way, or is it thought to be more of like a legitimate history?
So, a couple of things. There was a book put out 2013, I think, by a guy named Chen, and he makes the argument, and I think it's pretty much accepted. We don't have any evidence for the flood story occurring, like being a motif before 2000 BCE. Which is pretty striking. It was striking to me when I read it, but it's true. I mean, like we don't have evidence for it, and in fact, we have some pretty solid evidence that it doesn't show up until then. Like there's a reason behind it. So the question about what did they think it meant, or what did they think that it was describing some ancient historical event? I don't know that that's the the right question. So the reason that I ask, or the reason that I say that, is because there are lots of things in ancient literature and mythological texts that don't square with one another. They don't need to, right? So the example that I always give is certain deities have a family, a lineage in one text. You know, God A is the father of God B. Right. But in another text, it's not that lineage. There's a different lineage. And
they might be siblings or something, right?
And so but that's not problematic for them, right? That's not the point of what the text is doing. So here's the order that we have, just so that I guess that we put this out here early. You have the Sumerian flood story, right? You have this is the first that we have, you know, showing up right around 2000, maybe a little bit later. Like very slightly later.
Right.
And then you have like Atrahasis, which is a Akkadian text from, you know, the mid, maybe slightly earlier than that, second millennium BCE.
Or tropes. Right.
And those Akkadian texts, that Akkadian text, you know, gets brought into the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have precursors to it. Like, I call them precursors, but like the form that you see, like if you were to go pick up what Penguin Publishers, you know, Epic of Gilgamesh, and you would read it, it's the standard Babylonian. So it's something that's coming from around 1200, 1100, something like that BCE, right? And then it's being copied down into the first millennium.
Right.
But all of those, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just to clarify. So that would be a more recent iteration than perhaps when we think it was first penned. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty sure, and again, because we have all these tablets, we can kind of nail down with reasonable certainty that early second millennium is when you know, the flood story starts to come about. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, we have an earlier iteration of it.
Okay.
Later on, in the late second millennium, things sort of get added to it, which is standard protocol in scribal practice in the ancient Near East. But this, you know, the form of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we have, that you read about, is the standard Babylonian form usually. And it's full. It has all the different episodes, you know. But what that Epic of Gilgamesh is doing, to greater or lesser degrees, is pulling from earlier individual Sumerian stories about Gilgamesh. So, for example, you have this individual story, Gilgamesh and Huwawa, and Huwawa is this, beast, this guardian beast out in the cedar forest,
right,
to the west. And that individual story, you have Enkidu, his buddy, and Gilgamesh. They decide they're going to go off and they're going to fight and kill, Huwawa. That's a standalone story in Sumerian. We have it. We have lots and lots and lots of copies of it. It's in my dissertation, parts of it anyway. And but then you have another standalone Sumerian story, Gilgamesh and Aga. And then you have another one, the death of Gilgamesh, or Gilgamesh Enkidu in the Netherworld, or Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven. These are all individual stories.
We've got like the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew kind of vibe going on here. A lot of installments of Gilgamesh doing cool stuff.
Yeah, but they're not set in any kind of a chronological pattern. They're just individual stories about him. It would sort of be like, I'm trying to think of something that I know, because I didn't read the Hardy Boys stuff, but like,
listen, I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression. Okay. I am not a Hardy Boys expert around here, or Nancy Drew for that matter. Unfortunately, I was a Warriors kid. So I read the cat story where cats were doing different things. As you can imagine, that landed me with a lot of friends growing up. Well, it's kind of an anthology, though, right? Like it's similar characters, no particular order, doing various cool things that aren't necessarily meant to be linked together in a single.
That's right.
Line, right?
That's right.
Okay.
And then what ends up happening is starting in the Old Babylonian period and like becoming finalized. By the way, if people want to read about this, Andrew George is the person to read. If you just Google Andrew George Gilgamesh, you'll get a 2005, I think is when he published it. It's 2-volume. It's like the standard work on the Epic of Gilgamesh, but he'll talk about all this stuff in the introduction.
Right. Cool.
But so they brought all of these, Sinlake Unini, the editor, the guy that is credited with putting this Epic of Gilgamesh together in the Standard Babylonian in the late second millennium. He's taking these stories and weaving them together into this coherent whole with a very specific purpose, right? Very specific. Like he's doing something. He's telling a story and tying these things all together. So, but just so that we, kind of take a step back, and why in the world am I talking about this other than the fact that we're talking about the flood story, is that all of this stuff, there's no question which one came first, right? The Mesopotamian flood story came first. Like, write it down. It's like, this is not an issue. This is, I don't even want to call it consensus, because it's like overwhelming consensus scholarship. It's not even a question.
This is business as usual, though, for anyone in the comment or anybody in the side chat, all 106 people, and yet somehow we don't have that many likes. I don't know what's going on there, but listen, you got to shame the chat sometime.
More shame.
Yeah, more unlimited shame for the chat. But this is the classic thing that, and I say creationist because Genesis Apologetics is a creationist YouTube organization. This is a classic trope, right? It's taking something that is so consensus that conventional science or the conventional community of academia doesn't even notice the fact that there are people still complaining that it may not be consensus. They don't know that Genesis Apologetics exists and is saying this because it doesn't matter. Nothing they say is going to change the fact that we know what we know. Yeah. And this is pretty solid stuff. And the same thing is true with all of the biology stuff too, right? Like they put out these arguments where it's like scientists aren't sure about blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but they are, though. Like, you can sit down, and this is my experience every time. They'll put forward something that we don't know about, like, I don't know, the evolution of blood. Then I'll sit down at Google Scholar and type in the evolution of blood and get enough tomes to fill a library, right? And it's like, these guys don't have they have access to this.
Yeah.
Dapper Dino, one of our chat friends, is continuously trying to find out if you have read the Epic of Gilgamesh in the original Klingon. Because Dapper likes Klingon and tries to he wants everyone to read it in the original Klingon. No, Dapper. I don't know, Dr. Josh, have you?
Twice. I've read it twice in the original Klingon.
Hell yeah! Listen. Yeah, you gotta put up with
Prove me wrong. Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. Shall we continue with the cube here? Let us we can let them regale us with this.
Killing or maiming its passengers. That's obviously quite different than the biblical ark, which had a 7-to-1 length-to-width ratio, which is very similar to many of today's ocean barges, making a feasible design for staying afloat during the flood. Scripture provides clues that Noah and helpers likely had between 55 and 75 years to build the ark. The second key for determining which of these flood accounts is the original is the duration of the flood provided by each. The Gilgamesh flood lasted a mere 6 days, whereas the Genesis flood lasted 371 days.
So, from my perspective, the way that, like, if I was just presented with this information and someone said to me, Erica, which one do you think came first for a global flood, an event as phenomenal as that? My inkling would be like, this is akin to a fishing story, right? You start with the one that's more realistic, which is that it rained for 6 days, like probably due to the inundation of some kind of local river. And then over time, that bloats into a 371-day flood that covered the world. So I don't understand the argument that's being made here. Why the longer one is? What kind of argument is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like what he's arguing is that 6 days, that wouldn't be enough to flood the world. So you have to go with the more realistic one. He would say that, the longer one is the more realistic one. But the problem.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying the problem with this is, I don't want to say I don't blame them for this because this is sort of complicated literary stuff. But it's sort of not understanding, I think, what the primeval history, Genesis 1 through 11, is doing, how it's functioning. And you have to pay attention to that sort of thing. So, for example, just taking a step back, Genesis 1 is written by, and this is consensus, everybody agrees on this, is written by an author or an editor or a group of editors, whatever, called P. We call it the priestly writer.
Right.
And however that shakes out, like, I don't want to get into like big thing about that if there are people in the chat that want to debate me on the documentary hypothesis. But
chat, listen, my chat's pretty cool. I don't think that chat is gonna be like, this guy that's got a PhD in the subject says that it's consensus. Better take him on that.
Oh no, it's more that in the consensus that, well, it doesn't matter. Okay. But the point is, so everything that I'm getting ready to say is just consensus. I try to just say things that are consensus scholarship.
I think that's fair. That's a fair way to do it.
So if you read through Genesis 1, you see the literary nature of it, right? So the first 3 days are creating the spaces in which days 4, 5, and 6, they create the things that inhabit those spaces. Mm-hmm. You can see the literary tie there. And there are lots of these. One that you see, though, that's picked up again in the flood account is that the earth, the world begins as a watery mass in Genesis 1. That's not that way in Genesis 2. That's a different, creation motif. It's a different account.
Right.
But in Genesis 1, it starts as water. Right, and this is part of this, what they call the chaos Kampf, the
untamable primordial seas that are that have to be overcome by something.
That's
right?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. But this is demythologized, mm-hmm. right? So it's tried. They want to keep you sense it, right, as maybe as a genre, but they demythologize it so Yahweh's not fighting against another monster, because what monster even could come close to fighting him? It's just, the water. Anyway.
Right.
The point is that the world starts off as this watery mass, and God separates it, right? He separates the upper water from the lower water. Mm-hmm. This is how, so you got a dome that's up here holding the upper waters back, and then the ground is, pushing down the great deep. Well, if you think about what happens in the flood story, you have the sluice gates in that dome open up, let that water back, and the fountains of the great deep are broken up and let all that water up to uncreate back to this primordial watery mass.
Mm.
It's a do-over, right? But that's the literary connection that's being made here. So I guess my point here is that if you take a step back and look at the literary structure, the literary connections that are made, what the text is doing, these questions don't even come into your mind. Like, which one's more realistic? What? Like, that's not, what do you mean, which one's more realistic? That's not the point.
Right.
That's not the point at all. When Doctor Strange is like levitating, holding that, thing, and he's 6 inches off the ground as opposed to 10 inches off the ground, which one's more realistic? How would he levitate 10 inches instead of 6?
Right.
What?
Maybe, okay, I might be misremembering this, but I feel like I remember at some point, at least within the context of the history of the Bible as a text, that there used to be sort of the Tiamat analog, right? That's like was it Rahab or something similar like that? It's like a chaos monster. Is that true, or am I misremembering?
Yeah. So the word for deep
in
Genesis 1 is Tehom, which is a cognate of Tiamat, most likely. Cool. And lots of people, like we just had, if anybody's interested in this sort of thing, we just had a couple months ago, think Josh, Eckhart Fromm on our channel. And he talked about sort of these, connections to the Babylonian material, the Mesopotamian material. It's a really interesting discussion. And he's a super nice guy. Brilliant. But what you see in Genesis 1 demythologized, where you don't actually see, the great deep as an animate figure, you do see in the Psalms and in Job and in Isaiah. Like that's right. These sort of, early chaos creatures come back, and Yahweh has to fight them, right?
Right.
In a completely overpowering way. Like, it's no contest.
He's OP. Yeah. They gotta, in the next patch, they gotta nerf Yahweh a little. He's too strong.
But this is the sort of thing that we see. So, but again, paying attention, I think, closely to the literary aspects, that's why I sort of giggle at this stuff, because what he's trying to do to get at which one's earlier, we know, like, there are certain things that we know.
Right.
We know when the Israelites came into the land of Canaan, or show up, take their ethnic stance. How about that? In the land of Canaan.
There we go.
They didn't come in from the outside, right? They were always there. They're Canaanites. But we know when that happened, right? And we know when all the Mesopotamian texts were we have the tablets, right? This isn't guesswork. We know when they come from. So this idea of trying to get at, well, if we look at, which one seems more realistic, which one's earlier, it just seems like a very strange thing to do. Now, we know which one's earlier. That's not the question. The question that I think he needs to be asking himself is, what is the biblical text doing? Because it's using atrahasis, right? It's using the text that you see in Gilgamesh Tablet 11. It's using this story, just like it uses the laws of Hammurabi in Exodus 21. And like how specifically does that is debated, and like whatever. But we know that it uses uses Ugaritic material, uses all kinds of stuff. But the question is not like which one came first and which one's more true. The question needs to be, what is the text doing? How is it changing the story? And I think they do talk about this in this video, and I'll emphasize it a little more when we get there. But those are the things that you need to pay attention to, because this text is doing something, and what it's not doing is scientific or historical writing. It's not doing that.
I couldn't put it in a better way. To summarize, do you think it would be fair to say that, to use your Marvel analogy, that the analogy of what he's doing here is having like the script for Iron Man, the original Iron Man, the first movie, and then the script for Doctor Strange, and then instead of just looking at the dates at the top of the scripts, being like, well, Doctor Strange seems more realistic. I mean, Iron Man seems more realistic, but let's, for the sake of the argument, therefore, Doctor Strange was to come first. And then it's like, well, that's cool, but that's not the methodology that we use to decide for what comes first, right?
That's exactly right.
All
and
right.
To sort of just real quickly stay to maybe bring it home, to use the Iron Man movies, when we ask the question, what is the text doing, or what is the story doing, or what is the movie doing? If you think about the way Iron Man works, I guess you see a similar sort of thing in the Die Hard series. But in Iron Man, the first one, like, that suit is indestructible, right? I mean, like, it takes so much to tear it apart.
Mm-hmm.
But by the third movie, I mean, like, he's got 50 of them, and they're getting blown up. Like, this one just falls apart. This one breaks. This one gets shot, and it's done. And so you would look at that and you would say, wait a minute, as time goes by, wouldn't you assume that the material would be further developed and be stronger? So obviously, movie 3 must have come before movie 1, because that it would only get stronger as we go. It's asking all the wrong questions. The right questions are, what is the storyline? What's the plot doing? And of course, like, if all the Iron Man fans, like, I think the point is that when you get to Iron Man 3, they're trying to draw the distinction between, like, is Iron Man just the suit, right? And in this case, the suit becomes weaker, he becomes stronger, and so Iron Man, he is Iron Man, not just the suit.
Well, on this channel, we simp for Iron Man, so I think that's an appropriate assessment of the trilogy continuing on into the later Marvel universe. Richie Estrada for $10 quick super chat. This one, listen, you're gonna want to leave the stream at this point, but resist. They say, why do theists believe in a biblical flood? I don't know. Boo, boo. Don't leave. Please don't leave. Richie, we don't have you, Richie. Richie's trying to scare you off. Thank you for the super chat, by the way. Okay, we have so much to get through. Let's continue. Let's let it go for a minute.
Both accounts claim the flood was worldwide, but how could water cover Earth in just 6 days? A floating 200 by 200 foot cube and 6 days for worldwide inundation certainly stretch credulity. The next consideration is the reasons for the flood given by each of the two accounts. In the Genesis account, God's judgment is just. He was patient with utterly wicked mankind for 120 years before sending the flood, and showed mercy to the last righteous family. In the Gilgamesh account, the flood was ordered by multiple self-centered squabbling gods that were starving without humans to feed them sacrifices. These two are quite different. Finally, there are several other parts of the Gilgamesh account that are obviously mythical, such as Gilgamesh being 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal.
Like, if you read through the first four verses of Genesis 6, I mean, like, you have the sons of God and the daughters of men. Man, that's crazy mythical stuff. Okay, yeah. Okay.
I started laughing because Genesis Apologetics is just like coming at like Gilgamesh with like a petty bitterness. Like, imagine reading the Genesis account where like God is mad that the humans that he created are doing the things that he gave them the ability to do through like putting the tempting thing in the garden. And then you call like the Epic of Gilgamesh deities like selfish and petty. And then God's just like, guess I'll flood the world then. Like,
I mean, but this was sort of the thing that I'm actually really proud of this guy or whoever wrote the script, because I think this is actually a really critical point. So it's absolutely true. If you go back and read through Atrahasis, for example, from which Gilgamesh, Tablet 11's flood story comes from.
Right.
From which it comes from. That was very terrible. I didn't mouth good. So
listen, we allow a grace period for stumbling over words, trust me.
But if you look at what happens, Enlil, the god that sends the flood, it does so because humanity is multiplying so much. So they create humans to do the work of the gods. You can see the parallel there with Genesis 2. But they create humanity, and then humanity starts to multiply and multiply and multiply. And pretty soon there's so many of them that they're so loud, Enlil can't sleep anymore. Right?
Don't you hate when that happens?
It's so he's the flood isn't the first thing that he thinks of, right? There's like pestilence, and there's all kinds of little other things that they try to do. And the god Enki keeps, or Ea in the Akkadian, keeps like thwarting his plans, sort of behind his back. And so finally, sends the flood, and of course Enki or Ea still thwarts the plan and saves, Utnapishtim and his family and whatever, the animals. And when they come out, they still enact this process where a demon will come and snatch certain babies from their mother's laps. It's human control of human procreation, right? That's the point. But Enlil is called evil for doing that, right? This evil thing that he has done, sending the flood. So there's no question that when the Bible, when the Hebrew Bible comes along, and much later, and reworks this text, it's doing so as in many ways as a polemic. It's saying, yeah, look at Enlil, the Mesopotamian gods, but Yahweh was so perfectly justified to do this. Because look, every thought of their hearts, every imagination was completely wicked all the time.
They had it coming.
So they had it coming.
I even as a youngster, I always found myself reading the story of Noah and being like, yeah, but like, what did the animals do? Like these guys are just, just chilling out, minding their own business, and God swoops in with a massive vibe check to like every animal on the planet, and they're just like, okay, my bad. Oh man, it's what are you gonna do? All right, like this is a cool relief here. I like this. This is and I like I don't know if that's Gilgamesh or Atrahasis is holding this little lion. That's very cute to me. A+. It
is cute.
You gotta appreciate the little wins in these videos. So far, we've got cute relief and the cube arc. Those are the two winners so far.
Gilgamesh and others called upon the gods, and the sky god Anu creates a wild man named Enkidu to fight Gilgamesh. The battle is a draw, and they become friends. Gilgamesh apparently also encounters talking monsters and a scorpion man in his journey.
Not
like a donkey or something that talks.
This guy's always
nice. Why is the serpent's punishment to crawl on it?
That guy, I always get that ad. It's always that dude. I like to imagine that that they picked Genesis Apologetics on purpose. You're right, though. They really are doing the Doctor Strange thing here. They're doing that thing that you were just mentioning, where they're like, look how unrealistic it is.
Yes.
Many myths are based on historical accounts, but they get embellished over time, becoming more and more mythical as the story is repeated over generations. This is exactly what we see with flood myths like Gilgamesh. They take the original historical account.
Not the Bible one. Bible one's right.
Listen, I appreciate too, and I know I'm throwing a lot of shade at Genesis Apologetics for their production value, but appreciate you can really tell the difference what they've ripped from other things and which are their own, like graphics, because this right here, hold on, this doesn't look good. This color choice is bad. But I don't know. I like to come at Genesis apologetics. I like this too. They're assessing, in the story, right? The cube is certainly seaworthy in the story, but they're just like, is it seaworthy? Nah, that's the cube. Like, nah, it's not floating. And then they just, I don't know. I love it. I love it.
I feel like the Borg ship, had that basic shape and seemed to do pretty well.
It did fine. Yeah, I know. What do these guys know? I'm getting petty though. I get more and more petty as the video goes. Stupid Horror Energy, thank you for the $5 super chat. She says, "Get YouTube red, nerd." My problem is I have a lot against YouTube. YouTube is a small source of income for me, but I also don't like how they run things. So I refuse to pay for YouTube Red. And then David Neff says pay for use ad blocker. But there are a lot of sites that I utilize where if you utilize ad blocker, they may turn it off. So I'd rather just suffer through the ads. I don't care. Whatever. Yeah, chat can, come at me, chat. I'm not in the mood.
Come at me.
Over time. For example, the earlier version of the Gilgamesh flood account clearly identifies the flood as a local river flood, with the dead bodies of humans filling the river like dragonflies, and moving to the edge of the boat like a raft, and moving to the riverbank like a raft. Centuries later, this gets exaggerated into a global worldwide flood, where humans killed in the flood fill the sea like a spawn of fish.
This feels very, I don't know if you've seen the subreddit Leopards Ate My Face, right? Or like Sulfur Werewolves, where it's just like they're doing the thing that they should be applying to their own thing, where they're like, look at this, it's getting exaggerated through time. Boy, wouldn't it be silly if you believed the Epic of Gilgamesh was like a historical account, and then they're like, but boy, the flood sure is cool and true, isn't it?
It's very interesting. I'll keep this short just because I know we got to keep going. But there's a king named Naram Sin from the end of the third millennium, like 2300, 2340, something like that. And he has we have all the not all, but like many inscriptions, like the actual physical inscriptions about this stuff, right? We know that there was this massive battle that he fought,
right?
And or series of battles. And there's an inscription that talks about how his city, Agade, or Akkad, the citizens were so thankful to the king that they pleaded with the gods, requesting that they would deify Naram Sin. And so the gods do, they deify him. Now you might think if we just had that inscription, well, I mean, that's not that, so what? We have administrative texts from his reign, lots of them.
Okay.
And leading up to this event, his name appears, and it's just his name, the name of the king. After these events, his name starts appearing with a divine symbol before it.
Or the recognition of this deification, right? like
Yeah.
Okay.
So and it stays there, right? We also have a stele that was put up. It's called the Victory Stele of Naram Sin, and there's an inscription on it that has his name, and it's got the divine symbol, and it has him conquering, I think, the Walubians, but I'm not sure about that. Shouldn't quote me on that. But he's like twice as tall as everybody else, and he's wearing this horned helmet, and the horned helmet is another divine symbol.
Okay.
Right? So we have a story. We have a story about him being deified after winning battles that we're reasonably sure he fought. Then we have administrative texts that are not religious, right? They're not religious texts. They're like 2 sheep and 1 goat donated to dedicated to the temple. They're not religious. They're administrative. They're economic texts, and they start showing up. Naram Sin's name shows up with a divine symbol, and then we have these monuments that show him as divine. Well, what would you conclude from that, right? And any Christian that you would ask, I would imagine, hopefully, they would say, well, I mean, there are other reasons that would happen outside of he was made a god, right? We we can think about other ways that those events transpired without him being made immortal. But it seems like when you get to the New Testament, those sorts of things, and really just anything in the biblical text, those sorts of restrictions on, or other possible, much more plausible ideas about why this might happen go out the window, and it's just what's the most plausible thing.
You can add Occam's razor to the list of illegal tools to utilize in the apologetics textbook. It's just not allowed.
Oh my gosh. Sorry.
That's super interesting. That again, combing through the tomes of my dusty memory library from Egyptology, that reminds me a lot. I'm gonna butcher. I'm pretty sure it was Ramses II, but they had some war to the north, and it ended up being like this stalemate, if memory serves, with what the Egyptians were fighting. And then afterwards, Ramses was like, he recounts this, and I don't think it was a stela. It might have been something else, like a propaganda piece, so to speak, right? And he was like, Ramses boldly deterred, the attackers until they begged for mercy, and then thus he granted them mercy, and so there wasn't a war anymore. And it's like, yeah, the dude just went up there and was like, this sucks, let's leave. And then he was like, ooh, how do we spin this? Like, just people doing people things a lot of the time, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Which, and that's that for me, that was very much an interesting part of my kind of transition from being kind of a theistic evolutionist to being someone who was more agnostic, because it really started to become people doing people things a lot of the time, looking at a lot of the texts. So I digress. I'm sorry. We'll both monologue all day, but I'm having fun. So let's continue.
Both accounts have a god or gods that are sending judgment, describe a worldwide inundation, have an ark built to specific dimensions that are loaded with surviving humans and animals, and land just a few hundred miles apart from each other after using birds as a test to find dry land. Myths often grow from being historical to being more mythical, but they almost never develop in the reverse, becoming more truthful and accurate over time. While these accounts...
So this is like another werewolves thing, right? Like, yes, true, excellent point, Dan Biddle and the boys. How shall we apply this moving forward?
Yes,
I'm sure it will be wholly appropriate and rational, to say the least.
Mirror each other in so many ways. Which account is the original historical one? The feasible one, of course. While both accounts describe plenty of divine intervention, only the biblical ark size, shape, function, build time, and flood duration makes sense. Let's see what Dr. Randall Price...
Can I pause it for just a second before he gets... So, I had a friend that was an artist, and she took some time one afternoon, maybe for like a half hour. So like that was the extent of my expertise, to explain to me how like many painters will paint, right? And so she said, so I mean, if you look at where the eye line goes,
right?
So it'll go across the top from left to right, because we read from left to right, and that's how we're accustomed to to looking. So it'll go left to right. If I butcher any of this, I'm sorry, all you artists out there. And then it comes down in like a Z and then goes across again. So that's kind of how your eye naturally goes. So you can see things, in those quadrants or following that pattern or whatever. So, I was like super excited, because now I'm an art critic, right? I mean, like, take me to the Met.
The Louvre.
The Louvre. So I was like, I don't know, a week later or something, I was at another friend's house, and they had this painting up on the wall, and she was there, and I said, oh, now see, like this painting must have been painted by someone probably from the Middle East that reads right to left, because if you look at the way the layout is, it goes clearly from this direction, and I'm waxing eloquent to my friend, and she walks in and she points at the name, and the name was like Rusty or something, it was like, and she said, Josh, this is modern art, right? It doesn't work the same. And that was the last time I looked at any paintings. No, but the point is that like there are times when looking at sort of these internal characteristics or internal features work, right? So Judge Judy is a great example of this, right? Somebody comes in and is telling a story, about why they think the other person should, pay them money. And they say, well, they abused me. Oh, okay. Well, how'd they abuse you? Well, they punched me in the arm. Okay. Well, that's all. Well, but they also punched me in the face and hit me with a wrench. And she says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You would have led with that. Right. So this doesn't ring true to me. So in this scenario where the genre is trying to retell like a historical event, an actual event that took place, then you use that methodology. But when you try to apply it here, like
the direction is all wrong, right? Like the way in which we're moving from point A to point B, it does not follow, not in the slightest.
That is exactly right.
By the way, I took an introduction to 3D art for an elective in my undergrad career, and nothing humbled me more about art and what art is about than taking a class about art, because I realize I'm very uncultured.
Yes, I am a Philistine.
Yeah, but I like cartoons. Like that's, what are you gonna do? But I will. I consider myself a fine consumer of cartoons. So that in the realm of low art, I am a critic.
Nice. But I want to point out just very quickly before you hit play again. We actually have a very clear example of this in Genesis 1. We talked about it already. So you have like the Enuma Elish, the earlier creation story, which we can date. Like we know it. It's just like we can date all these flood texts. But we know that the Enuma Elish is from the second millennium, right? It's much earlier. Right. And of course, the story that it is modeled after and does things goes back in Sumerian to the second millennium, like earlier second millennium, probably even into the third millennium. So, but we know this. But in that story, we have the Chaos Kampf, right? We have the battling of Tiamat, battling of the sea monster. Well, then you come to Genesis 1, and compared to the Enuma Elish, the water is just water, Erica. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not some crazy sea monster that stretches incredulity, or stretches credulity. Like, come on.
Listen, I know rakia, the word for the firmament, means like hard shell, but they were being metaphorical just in that one phrasing, and the rest is literal.
Yes, absolutely.
That's how you honestly read the text.
But if you were to apply this principle that he's applying here, you would have to say that the more realistic account would come first. But we know that it didn't. Like we know, and of course we know that the flood accounts didn't go that way either. But the point is that like that one's, I would say, even more clear. But so it's applying, it's trying to understand modern art by using a whatever other art that I was talking about.
the line of sight lens. There you go. I don't know that I could name like 3 kinds of art. I'd be like modern art, and then I would be like cartoons. Like that's my. So let's let Dr. Randall Price. This is a dashing picture of him. He looks good here. I like that he's holding a vase of some sort. That lets me know that he's a professional.
Yeah, definitely.
Research professor and curator at Liberty Biblical Museum has to say about this topic.
What extra biblical text would you say substantiate the flood account in Genesis 6 through 9?
Well, let's work our way backwards. We can start with all the church fathers. Every one of them mentioned the flood, and it's always a global flood. There's no example in any of them of a local flood. And then as we move back to a first century writer like Flavius Josephus, who wrote for the Romans, He's writing a history of the Jewish people, primarily to impress the Romans because they defeated the Jewish people. It makes them look greater if they defeated a great people. But he goes into the details, and he talks about that in this place where the ark landed, they call it Armenia. They say that there are people who show relics of the ark. There's at least 4 different accounts in Josephus where he says people chip off pieces of the bitumen and make amulets of it, or people show these things.
This is a fun anecdote. It feels very Indiana Jones to me. I'm surprised we actually, I mean, there would have been a lot to work with Noah's Ark rather than the 4th Indiana Jones movie with the Crystal Skull, which I don't care what anyone says, it's a fun movie, even though it's nothing compared to the other 3. It's still enjoyable. But this is really interesting to me. Let's start the furthest away and move backward. That doesn't really seem like in this context the best way to go about this, but what do I know?
Yeah. Sorry, Stupid Whore Energy has a really good point. And I mean, I know what she means. I'm sure he didn't mean it quite this way, but I don't know if I agree with all the church fathers using the word global.
Yeah, Stupid Whore Energy makes excellent points and asks lovely questions, and I would agree with that. I think that would isn't that the kind of thing that would have got you thrown in jail?
Okay.
Yeah, let me ask you too, as someone who does what you do, you're involved with a lot of kind of examining apologetics. I don't know if you would call it counter apologetics, just applying a critical look to apologetics, we'll say. Do you like astrally project from your body whenever someone brings up Josephus? Because I feel like Josephus is a very commonly weaponized source.
Yeah. So there's this, I think this historical principle that people miss, or that, let me do it another way. There's this interpretive approach that people use to historical sources that is, I don't know why I guess I know why they do it, but it's very strange. And that is, if he says it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Like either everything that he says is right or everything that he says is wrong.
Right.
So for example, you read through Josephus, and from the period that he's writing in, or maybe even back into the Hasmonean period or something, like, and again, I'm not a Josephus expert, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but like the closer you get to his time, the much more reliable, the more reliable it is. But I mean, he's got, stories about how Alexander the Great comes down to Jerusalem, and the priest goes out to man. He worships the God of the Jews and does a sacrifice to the God of Jews. I mean, it's like, wait a minute, like this didn't happen. And he reads from the book of Daniel and realizes that that's him. I mean, it's like, well, okay. Yeah. So like, but then I'll make reference. So I'll say, well, look, that's Josephus, doing his own apologetics, right? And he's doing something with that text. But then I'll cite him for something else and say, see, this. Well, wait a minute. You just said that Josephus isn't reliable. Yeah, right. It's not all or nothing, right? It's
the same thing. I sympathize greatly because it is the exact same thing in biology, where it's like you can have someone make an amazing discovery. The classic example is, of course, Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution.
Yep.
He got stuff wrong, though, because he lived during the mid-1800s when, we did not have access to all of the information that we have today. So people will be like, do you know Darwin didn't know about genetics? He thought all this wild shit about biology that turned out...
Did you know Darwin didn't have an iPad? Did you know that?
Yeah, Darwin...
loser.
Yeah, Darwin didn't have access to a sequencing kit. Therefore, everything he's done, just throw it away, right? Or you get this kind of thing happens all the time, period, in human history. It's like people are fallible. They'll get things right. They'll get things wrong. But most importantly, they're products of their time. So it's not just what they've gotten right and what they've gotten wrong, but it's the influences that caused those mistakes to be made too. So it's like with Josephus, for example, like I'm thinking today about how you've got some historians, and I know we're in the world of alternative facts and things these days, but it's like you can pick someone off the street and I guarantee you they're going to say some things about history or biology or whatever that in 50 years are going to be incorrect. That doesn't invalidate the other true stuff that they said. Like that's the beauty of discovery, right? It's like you get to find out what you got wrong. So, but I think Josephus, I can't remember if this is, you're going to have to tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but didn't some of those ancient historians have some really interesting takes about like mythical creatures and like the dark continent and things like that of, I want to say it's like wild men or cyclopses and stuff like that, where it's, can be okay, but also, they're using secondhand accounts sometimes. So it's like, you can't always be sure that what they're saying is legit, right?
It's using a source uncritically is what it is, right? And atheists will do this too. Like, I want to be fair.
The people thing, right? Like people do
this. It's a people thing, right? Yeah. And so you can't say, well, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible talks about, like talking donkeys and talking snakes, and it gets these other things wrong. Therefore, no historical validity to it. You can't use it as a historical source. Now, to be fair, I don't hear a lot of atheists saying that. But the ones that I do, I say, okay, I get why you're saying that. But sort of the rule of thumb is, as you get closer, as you get later, it gets more reliable, right? So when you get down into like the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah, or you talk about the prophets in that period, and down, like as you get later, things start to become more reliable. Now that's not always the case. You can't like pick up the Book of Chronicles and write your history. That's not going to work. You can't pick up the Book of Daniel and write your history. That's not going to work. But you can't. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess is another way of saying that. So
I think 100% agree. And like the Bible is 66 books, and then like some of those books are also divided into multiple parts too, and multiple authors. It's like to assess the entire thing as right or wrong, period, is that seems insane to me, right? Like that logic is bonkers. But there's also a line between, like, that's a double-edged sword, so it's like you can't just look at it and be like, yeah, some stuff happened that's historically corroboratable with other historians or whatever, therefore Earth created in 6 days and resurrection and all that stuff. So all right, let's it's so draining, but we're going to power through it.
You're curious to see them, or that all the history of the barbarians, he says, he talks about Egyptian and Chaldean and the Greek, all of these have similar accounts of the flood, and he said this was the same as the legislator Moses. He talks about who wrote it. Now we go back in time, and this are those barbarian accounts. We have Sumerian accounts, the Eridu, Genesis. We have the Enuma Elish, we have Atrahasis, we have the Gilgamesh epic, we now have the Simmons cuneiform tablet, or the Ark tablet.
So didn't they just get done saying that that I forget if they were talking about the Enuma Elish or Atrahasis, but one of those was clearly discussing a local event? So it's like you can't say it's talking about a local event and then use it to support your global flood.
I don't remember.
I don't know. Maybe I misheard. I don't know. Chat, chastise me if I'm incorrect.
And we have the Sumerian king list. All of these mention the flood and have various details. All of them talk about the gods punishing man, and one man being chosen to bring either himself or his family, or alternately, and certainly in every case, all the animals onto a vessel to survive this flood, this punishment. And then afterward, we have various details. He sent out a dove or a raven, which is like to mention in the biblical text, or and almost all of them, when he gets off the ark, offers a sacrifice to please the gods. Well, this is not only in the same chronological order as you have in the Bible, but it's the same unique events and details.
I want to toss a little shade at the difference in all of these. There, the punishment and judgment is like a 3D gavel, and then you've got like this very sullen, angry-looking Moses. This is a guy that I don't want to mess with, right? Like, I can see why he was picked. And then obviously, whoever was manning the Genesis apologetics thing was like, look, we don't want to buy more clip art and more 3D models. So can't we just get someone to like draw the rest of it? Someone was like, yeah, like my nephew draws, I think. I'll get him to do it, and then they message out and he's like, damn it, like my evangelical uncle wants me to draw for him. And then you get like the half-assed spectacle that is this, because we clearly have a bunch of different animals down in this bottom left-hand corner. I really like this dove that looks like a pigeon. Anyways, I'm just tossing shade for fun. I'm just being mean. But okay, let's I don't know. Any thoughts, Josh, on the art style? I don't know. Maybe you stage.
I'm good. You hit it.
Okay, cool.
That are in the Bible. Now, all these predate the Bible, and you could accuse the Bible of copying from them. But as we mentioned earlier, the problem is the Bible comes across more simple, more historical, more believable, while these are complex myths, and they differ among themselves in those details. But where they all agree is the similar core history that must have been passed on after the flood, and as civilization spread out and generations begin to go their own way, they develop their own myths, which keep that core common history, but add to it in their own direction. The Bible does.
So, that feels very self-aware wolves to me. Like, I know we've kind of beat this horse to death, but it's just very interesting to me that he can be so level-headed so as to note the similarities and note the dating, and then turn around and essentially say, well, the only reason the Genesis account isn't given credit as being first is because it just isn't, right? Like, he doesn't actually tackle that, which I don't know. That's kind of weird.
I'm just confused. So is his argument that the flood story happened, that the flood happened, and then it was written down by the Mesopotamian scribes, and then nobody wrote it down for a really long time in Israel? It was just passed on orally, and then finally in the 7th century, 6th century, 5th century? I don't know. Like, I'm confused as to how he actually sees this playing out.
It's almost like they were like, dude, like in their version of this, the Hebrews were like, damn it, like they're taking credit for our thing, and apparently, even though it was written much dated much closer to the date that this global flood supposedly occurred, they're getting it all wrong, right? I mean, didn't we just get done saying that it's like the closer to an event you are, right, the more likely it is to be whatever percent true, or that diagram that they showed. So it seems like they're saying the opposite here. Exactly what you just said. That feels absurd. Like, why would it be orally passed down from a single group of 8 people, and yet everyone's getting it wrong so shortly after it happened, right?
And everybody's writing it except the people that got it right.
Right.
They're like, we're not writing our shit down. No. Pass it on. and then wait at just the opportune moment, boom, write that shit down.
Yeah.
Y'all got it
And
right.
by the way, even though this is the one that is the most far removed, this is the outlier, the one with all the outlier story elements to it when compared to all the previous ones. This is the one that's right. this is the one. Like I swear, trust me. Yeah, and then you run in. I don't know. It's a topic for another time, but you run into a lot of problems with all the civilizations that are dated so close to after the flood that seem to have a whole lot of people, which isn't going to work if you're coming from 8, individuals, 2 of which are like old. I mean,
well, the funny thing to me about this whole, there's a guy. Oh, I'm blanking on his name now. I can't believe I'm blanking on it because it's really popular. Mr. Batman.
oh,
It's a gentleman by the name of Mr. I think you might know him.
I know Mr. Batman. Fortunately, I've never interacted with Mr. Batman directly, other than moderating. Actually, I think I moderated a debate that he was in. Mr. Batman's bonkers. That dude is bonkers crazy. But yeah, chat knows Mr. Batman. You guys have my blessing to talk trash about Mr. Batman.
But one of the things that was really confusing to me about something that he said was, I think it might have been Jim Majors asked him, well, when did the flood happen? About 4,500 years ago. Okay, well, I mean, if it's 4,500 years ago that the flood happened, we're at 2,500 BCE, right? We have writing from 3,200, right? We have the tablets from 3,200, 3,100, lots of it. And we have early dynastic 1 stuff, lots of it. I mean, how did that happen?
You also have Egypt, which is known for its megalithic structures. And like the pyramids of Giza are problematic enough. And I've heard, Answers in Genesis will tackle the pyramids of Giza and they'll be like, well, obviously they wouldn't have survived the global flood. So they must have been built after. And then they invoke these absolutely batshit crazy population growth rates that seem to only apply for the first couple hundred years after the flood. And then they have to level out, or else we'd have billions, like hundreds of billions of people alive today if you're continuing with that growth rate. They also don't account for things like disease, infant mortality, which we know is happening because we've got a huge bias of babies in a lot of cemeteries because little kids just don't do so hot before medicine. But the interesting thing is about that is that it's like AIG will tackle the pyramids of Giza, but they don't touch the Red Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, the mastabas that come before, the Sphinx, all of these things that are dated unequivocally older than the pyramids of Giza that would have been just as difficult to build with a tiny group of people. I mean, Louis C.K., although I know he's problematic these days, said it best. It's like the way that this thing got done is they just threw human life at it until cool stuff happened, building things wise. But you got to have human life to throw at it. Like you can't just build it. I don't know. That always confused me. I don't know how they get those growth rates to work, but
yeah.
All right, let's hear some more of this.
Doesn't do it that way. It's not a perception. They're saying this is the way it happened in an orderly event, and they don't do like these others. They give you clear genealogies. They give you historical time frames. They give you dimensions, structures that are quite literal and actually work. Okay, so when you look at some of the weird proportions and things of some of these ancient Near Eastern accounts, the ark is a square box that couldn't float. It's a round type of basket that might have done this. Or, they all have the idea of a boat, but they don't. They're too far from the information. Whereas the biblical account gives you exact dimensions of something that is hydrodynamically stable, that will fit what it claims. It's just not. It's no comparison when we come to those things.
Jesus taught about a real flood and compared it to what the end times will be like. Jesus warned, but of that day and hour, no one.
Pause it for a second because I listened to the whole video and maybe it came in the earlier part. Did he talk about the species? I mean, like how did they fit all the animals on the ark?
Yeah, so that came before talking about as he puts it, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I don't know why that kind of grates on me. But again, I get petty as these things go on. They discussed they attempted to discuss this concept of speciation.
So how do you could you steel man their argument about just so that I can make sure I understood it?
Yes. So the case that Genesis apologetics and indeed most creationists make, who are young Earth creationists, is they've got the creation event 6,000 years ago, wherein God creates these sort of progenitor kinds. Sorry, my mistake. Sorry. That are archetypes of these major groups that they would then hyper evolve into post flood. And the idea is that they didn't diversify for whatever reason, or if they did, they didn't take, because you had to take one of each kind, they would have taken these progenitor kinds rather than the subspecies that would have evolved prior to the flood. But then that Noah takes one of each kind onto the ark, and these roughly settle, according to their baromenological work, roughly at the family level. So for instance, you would have a progenitor felid, right? A pair of felids that would then, after the ark lands, diversify into all the kinds of cat that we see today. They would do one for canids. They would do one for proboscideans. And then they attempt to do it too, or AIG tries to do this too for like dinosaurs, synapsids, all sorts of different prehistoric groups, temnospondyls, things like that. And then the idea is that after the ark lands, right, and they do this so that they can fit all the animals onto the ark. Because if you roughly settle it at the family level, well, I think it's 1,100 families roughly. Maybe it's 1,100 to 11,000. I realize that's a big difference, but and then they'll take those and hyper diversify afterwards into all the life we see today. Naturally, that's got a whole lot of problems with generation times, especially for your larger mammals like the proboscideans, who have a generation time that's just bonkers. You're not going to get all the Siberian mammoth tusks that we see up in the circle, for instance, that supposedly were flash frozen there either during the flood or in the ice age that resulted after the flood, because they tend to think there's this one single big honking ice age right after the flood that for whatever reason helped pressure these animals into hyper evolving into the forms that we find them in today. So does that make sense?
Yeah. So I feel like there's maybe a more basic problem with the text itself. So the word that is translated kind in Genesis 1 and here in Genesis 6, like I haven't looked at all of the different uses of this word, but pretty normally it's referring to the species level.
Yeah.
Not referring to the family level. Not that I have any expertise in those things, but like
I think I've heard you mention this before. Isn't it locust, specific birds, things like that, in like Exodus?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think it's in Leviticus. I can't remember, but
you would know.
Well, don't assume that. But no, I think it's problematic. Certainly, look in the major lexicons that they're taking that as species, and that's because of these passages that talk about specific types of birds. It's not like the bird kind.
Yes.
That means. I mean, it's laying out this type of bird and this type of bird and this type of bird. Right. So, I feel like that's very problematic.
It's also someone in the chat, Isaac Clark, actually says at the family level, so apes come from humans. So that's an interesting additional problem that they come at. They come, across, and AIG essentially takes this problem head on and basically just says, we have the great ape kind, which they are using old terminology for, and essentially they're calling them pongids, which is kind of the Linnaean way of looking at it. Because Carolus Linnaeus, right, our boy, the father of taxonomy, he is a creationist, and when he was presented with all of these skeletons of hominoids, so great apes and lesser apes, and he looked at them all, and there's this famous quote by him, which I'm paraphrasing it, but he's essentially like, I'm going to bring down the wrath of all the theologians because I can't for the life of me think of a single empirical reason, looking at the morphology, because we didn't have genetics at that point, to separate humans from apes. So he was arbitrary in it, and AIG does the same thing. They're like, well, we know humans aren't apes because the Bible tells us that we're non-animals, we're separate. Therefore, mankind is its own thing, and the great apes are another thing. So to answer your question, Isaac Clark, that is the only exception, and for completely, admittedly arbitrary reasons, which is interesting. I don't know, that that one makes me laugh, but in a sad way. That's really interesting about what is the is it mine, min?
Mean.
Mean. The last one. The one
Yeah, that's all right.
mean. Okay. All right. Cool. Okay, let's keep moving.
Not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Because Jesus stood firmly on the historicity of the flood and likened it to end times, the two go hand in hand. If the Genesis flood never happened, we have no foundation for believing in the rest of what Jesus said, including his second coming. At least for Christians, Matthew alone should destroy the flood as myth idea. Looking back through history, there are actually hundreds of flood accounts, and the similarity between these accounts and the Genesis flood are uncanny.
Something I always bring up because this is a very classic argument I've heard from creationists, is that, yes, look at all of the different examples. Every place has a flood myth. Therefore, it must be a historical thing. And that's really funny because it's like, well, in that case, then I guess shape-shifting trickster deities are legitimate because different cultures have those, It's very weird as an argument, I think. And as for them, they like to come at theistic evolutionists or like old Earth creationists or whatever with that last bit. And I think that it's really so arrogant to think that your interpretation is the only one that could possibly have any bearing. And I don't know enough about the theology to get into that interpretation or, what Christ thought, quote unquote, about Jesus. If, correct me if I'm wrong. The historicity of Jesus, is that like a consensus thing? What do people think about that? And that's what I thought. Okay, that he was a dude. He was at least someone who was a dude, right? But it's like you said earlier, like it doesn't really matter even within that context, right? Like that's not how we should be looking at it.
Yeah.
Okay. Boom.
Most of them seem to draw from the same common themes: judgment from God, a family chosen to preserve humanity, and loading animals. The early Chinese certainly seem to have Genesis and the flood in mind when they invented written language.
I remember this part. We can probably. I may actually have to go soon because I'm starting to fall asleep.
Oh no, I know. I'm so sorry.
This part would just frustrate the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Listening to them talk about the Chinese characters. Oh my God. Lust is a picture of a woman. That has to be Eve.
Well, we don't have to go through this end part. If you want to summarize it for us, because it's been quite some time since I've looked at the entirety of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's just, I wouldn't have any expertise in this, but I mean, he's looking at different Chinese characters and showing how the one that stands out is the picture of the word for boat. The symbol for boat is a boat with 8 people on it. Oh my God! What's got to be Noah and his family? I mean, it proves Jesus. It's like the whole thing's about. It's
really... you gotta love that. All right. Well, in that case, we'll stop with the video. Or would you be okay to take a few questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that if memory serves, this is like a lot of, and then they shill. Obviously, at the end, we get a lot of shilling.
They do that,
where they basically are like, "Are you looking for the right way to teach your youngsters what the truth is? How about just buy our overpriced merchandise? It's it's a living." Okay, let me double check over here. Take a peek at chat. Okay, guys, what kind of question? Okay, Dessel Drace is already on it. Dessel asks, Dr. Josh, how long until your book is finished? And what should interested skeptics consult in the meantime on Old Testament history and literary criticism? Finally, have you read Tim Callahan?
So Tim Callahan does not ring a bell. But that doesn't mean much for me. My memory is dope. Let me look at the question. So right, the book I'm writing the archaeology chapter now. So I would say I've got the chapter on prophecy to write. Mesopotamian history. I'm hoping to have it done by May, and then go through the editing process, and hopefully maybe by June, have it ready to sell, and then to send off to the guy to read. We're going to have that one published as an audiobook as well. Because I think it'll be geared toward that. So yeah. In the meantime, if you're looking for literary history, like Joel Baden's 2012 composition of the Pentateuch is excellent. If you there's a 2018 publication by John Collins. It's the 3rd edition of his Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. That's just a great resource to have to kind of get an overall feel for the Hebrew Bible. Of course, lots of stuff by, if you're more interested in like the European school, Reinhard Kratz is published. Schmidt. Actually, probably the place to go to look at literary criticism would be to go to my video on Digital Hammurabi called The Formation of the Pentateuch. I've got a sort of a key bibliography in the description. And as far as history, like William Deaver, who's, I think, he's not like a minimalist. Deaver's a pretty solid scholar. I really like him. But he's got a book that just came out, 2020 publication, called Has Archaeology Buried the Bible? And it's really, really good. But of course, if you're, something a little more, a little less conservative, be Israel Finkelstein. So he's got a 2001 publication that I can't remember the title of now. It's Unearthing the Bible. That's what it is. But yeah, anyway, the Deaver one's really good. It's an easy read too.
Slightly Odd Guy for $5 into Super Chat and says, I would love more of a Gutsy Gibbon Dr. Josh crossover series. What do you think? Good idea? Okay. That's very I've had a blast. So maybe I'll try to coerce Dr. Josh to come on more often for anything that I don't know about A&E, which is everything. So Captain Gargoyle says, not a question, but Dr. Josh, I saw you alongside Matt Dillahunty. You were too cool for school. So there you go. Congratulations.
Oh my God.
That's big coming from Captain Gargoyle. They don't dole out the compliments like that to me. I'll tell you that.
Well, I felt honored to be at his side. He didn't need me. He didn't need me in that debate.
Man, dude, I actually listened to that while as I told you earlier, I've been trying the exercise thing, and I bring it up all the time because I like people to hold me accountable. And when people are like, "Oh, have you run yet today?" and I'm like, "No," then it helps me feel guilty and forces me to go do it. But I was listening to it while I was running. And man, I just listening to Matt like roast other people intimidates me. Like I'm always like, damn, I never want to be on the other end of that. Like,
right.
Doesn't sound fun. Isaac Clark says, quote, Dr. Richard Carrier on the Mythical Jesus at 2025 on YouTube exposes ancient Christians as one of many religions that worshipped an angel of God in the magical space church. Thank you, Isaac Clark. I don't know enough about anything to comment on that, but thank you for the ad. James Downard, RJ, I don't know if you know RJ, Dr. Josh, but I'd like to know what Josh thinks is the hottest area of research in archaeology of religion. What are the biggest unanswered questions? That's a really good question. I would be curious about that as well.
I mean, as far as Palestine is concerned, the formation of Israel and its ethnogenesis is like, Avraham Faust wrote a book in 2001. I think it's just called The Ethnogenesis of Ancient Israel, but trying to get at where did Israel come from? See, like, early on in archaeological, biblical archaeology, they just read the Bible and you can see what happened. So then that has to match up with the archaeology. So there was this conquest model. They're looking for an exodus and then looking for these major sites, Jericho, Hatzor, these major cities, and go in there. And obviously we're going to find these huge fortified Canaanite cities that are, destroyed. And that's not what we find. Hatzor is, I think, the only one that would match. And I think it's like out of 38 different cities, he got one. But so this conquest model sort of fell by the wayside. Then it became like a peaceful infiltration model, and then it was like a peasant revolt. And now I think what there's a great book, 2018 published. It's not that long, but it's jam packed. She went to the University of Chicago, but her name's Mary Ellen Buck, and she wrote a book called The Canaanites. It's an excellent little book to pick up. It really, really is. Give you, it's not written as like an anti-apologetic thing. It's just who were the Canaanites, where'd they come from, what's their history, and essentially, like we have pretty reasonable. It's pretty reasonable to conclude that the majority of what turned into Israel were just Canaanites. They just always had been in the land. So they just identified ethnically in the highlands as Israelites. So those are always big questions that people are asking.
Man, that's so interesting. Okay, we have hold on just a sec. Okay, Kyle Saltzman. Hello, Kyle. They say, Dr. Josh, how would you respond to Christians who say the Old Testament is overwritten by the New Testament and should not be taken as real history?
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice way out, right? And I'll say this. My wife is an Anglican, and Megan is amazing. And like, if you were to ask, and if you were to ask Megan, like, do you have a problem with this failed prophecy, or do you have a problem with, the Exodus not being the way it's today? She'd look at you like you had three heads. Of course not. Like that's not what my faith is about, right? And if I were ever going to be a Christian again, that's the kind of Christian that I would be, right? Trying to see these texts as the product of humans interacting with what they believe to be the divine, right? And how can I not throw the baby out with the bathwater and try to glean principles like, love one another from that. I don't think you need the Bible to do that, obviously, but if I were going to do that, that's what I would do. So I like it when like there's a guy named Gregory Boyd who wrote a book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically saying it's taking a different approach to the inspiration of the Old Testament and saying it wasn't inspired in the way that we've thought. And so like when it talks about God commanding genocide or all these things, that's just people, it's not inspired. And like, hey, I much prefer that. I much prefer people to interpret it that way. So I don't think there's a lot of footing hermeneutically, theologically. But theology it's what people make of it. So
messy, and spirituality is a personal thing. Who am I to say? So Captain Gargoyle has another question for you. They ask if you have any videos about multiple gods referred to in the Bible. So I think like the sons of God is the idea that they're asking.
I don't think I've put one out yet. So I would say it's Mark Smith is probably the person to read on this. And he's got a whole bunch of books out. The one that stands out, I can't remember the title, but it's got like monotheism in the title. That's so terrible that I can't remember it. But if you just go to Amazon or Google or whatever and type in Mark Smith, you'll see his books. But excellent on this. Yeah, I mean, think you read passages like Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82. These even in like the book of Daniel. It's clear that originally the older form of Yahwistic worship involved a multiplicity of divine beings, right? I think in places like Deuteronomy 32, they're working to try to smooth that out a little bit, but the remnant is still there of it. So yeah, but no is the answer. I don't have a video up yet, I don't think.
That would be cool. I know. I think Trey the Explainer, weirdly enough, he's a channel that mostly does content on cryptids. How cryptids are not legit, which is they're good videos, but it is sad because cryptids are fun. But I think he did a video about that specifically, but I can't remember the details on it. Eric Viertaler, 92, hello Eric, says, Dr. Josh, what are your thoughts on John Walton's interpretation of Genesis?
So I haven't read a lot of his stuff. Some of the things that I have read, so John Walton is coming at this, he's up at, I think he's president of Tyndale.
I don't know. I've read all of his stuff. I've read some of the Lost World stuff back when, again, used to be pretty theistic evolutionary perspective, I guess. But yeah, I read some of his stuff, but it was a little over, some of it was a little over my head.
I mean, he's obviously a very intelligent guy, right? I mean, there's no question. But the problem is that I think when you start with, when you have, what's the word that I use? Commitments. And when you have commitments, it affects how you interpret the text, and it has to. And so, like, if you read through Genesis 1, his work on Genesis 1, he's got this idea that the word bara, the Hebrew word for to create, like has a specific meaning, and it's like to organize. It's not to create ex nihilo. And then he compares that to the Hebrew word asa, to do or to make, and like there's something there, but like lexicography is not so straightforward. Right. So when you end up saying these words mean this in all these different places, it usually doesn't pan out. And I certainly don't think, and his arguments have been heavily criticized by, I think, Dennis Pardee. I think actually Richard Averbeck, I think, did a review. Don't quote me on that though, because I know you're going to quote me on that, Erica. You're going to be like, he said Richard Averbeck did one.
Listen, Josh, this is like a sleeper channel. I'm actually just coming after you. This is all for blackmail later because you said so much intimidating stuff. Eminent Reflection says, question for Dr. Josh. This is a bit similar to one of the earlier questions. How accurate do you think it would be to sum up some biblical fundamentalists as thinking the Old Testament overrides the New Testament?
The other way around?
No. I don't know if maybe they meant other way around. It says it's thinking the old overrides the new. Maybe they meant new, because I would think that they would mean new overrides the old. That's typically.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely depends. So there are so many of I would say probably most of the apologists that I argue with might pay lip service to that and say like, yeah, New Testament develops things, but then they'll go back and vehemently argue that slavery in the Hebrew Bible is not the slavery that's in the ancient Near East. It's so much better. And it's not really slavery. It's like a job. It's like owning a credit card, and it's like, okay, well, look, it's like, well, I mean, if you're going to say that the New Testament develops it and does it, well, then, just roll with that, use that. But no, I think it's problematic.
That conversation about slavery, that was if you haven't seen that, everyone here, if you want to listen to a very interesting discussion, go to Modern Day Debate and watch Dr. Josh and Matt's conversation with Stuart and Cliff on slavery in the Old Testament. That's that was a hell of a conversation. It was really, really good stuff. Let me double check. So background really quick. Our pal Otangelo Grasshole is in the chat. This is a troll account who is very close to my heart. Troll in a funny way. They kind of mimic another guy who shows up who's a young Earth creationist. Sorry, I'm getting tired too. They asked you if you saw my debate with Kent Hovind and did you feel sorry for how bad Kent beat me?
I did not see it, but now I have to go watch it.
Well, listen, if you think you're getting out of this stream without doing your Kent impression for everybody, you're sorely.
Well, let me tell you, Eric, I really enjoyed that debate. Okay, and this is a picture of my wife. Okay, so let me tell you, there are 7 different types of evolution. There's space, Big Bang cosmology evolution, and the evolution of my car. Okay, because if the water rains down on my car, obviously we're going to have a can of soup. Okay, and that's what you believe. You come from rocks. Okay, so here, I've never seen dogs produce non-dogs, only water. Okay.
I'm gonna go back into I'm gonna go back into like defense mode. Captain Gargle says that's pretty good. Yeah, Dr. Josh has the best Kent impression online for sure. Ugly German Truth says, which of Kent's wives are we talking about, Dr.
Damn.
Oh man. And then oh, let me see here. Yeah. RJ says you've got Kent nailed for sure. TP Seeker says the average lifespan of people in the Western world held true through the Dark Ages was 35 to 45 years old. What's Dr. Josh's thoughts on Jesus being in India when he was ages 12 to 30? I've never heard that take before.
Yeah, I mean, questions about like the New Testament's not certainly not my field of specialization, and certainly not the historical Jesus. So I'd be reticent or very hesitant to comment on that.
Stupid Or Energy says, I've heard of that. You've heard of everything, Stupid Or Energy.
She has.
She knows all the stuff. Well, I think that's all the questions. And God, I've kept you here for 2 hours. So
it's been great.
Yeah, I had a blast. And thank you so much for being here with us. One last last question. Captain Gargle says, has Dr. Josh ever read Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff? I don't know. Have you?
The Gospel According to Biff. So, like, no, I haven't. Is that like Biff Loman from Death of a Salesman?
I don't know. My first thought was Back to the Future.
Back to the Future, yeah.
I don't know. Well, we got to let Dr. Josh get some sleep, so we're gonna shut this thing down. But I think it's fair to say that Genesis Apologetics isn't exactly working with the academic rigor that perhaps they should be working with.
Perhaps.
And so, thank you again for being here, chat. Thanks for being here with me too. You guys stay safe out there, and let me think. What's coming up with the channel? I've got a video coming out on the 2nd, I guess that's what, like a Tuesday, with regard to the Triassic mass extinction, which is it's a lesser known mass extinction, but a cool one nevertheless. We get to deal with the fall of the Pseudopsuchians. And what else is coming up? I don't know. Put a pin in it. I'll do a community post about it because I love the community posts. Okay, guys. See you later. Oh, Pharaoh Virgo Compy says, I just got here. Oof. Sorry. You can enjoy watching it back. Okay, guys, see you later. We're ending the broadcast. Take care, gentle and modern apes. It's ending.